It's Wednesday, the 5th of October. This is Politics Live from the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, where in half an hour's time, Liz Truss will deliver her first speech as party leader and Prime Minister. Joining me today, Stephen Bush of the Financial Times, the Daily Telegraph's Christopher Hope, and the Work and Pension Secretary, Chloe Smith. Today,
the vibe that I've picked up is a party that's really, really keen to get to work, to get the country moving forward and get the economy growing.
That assertion after a day of acrimony here at conference yesterday.
I'm very disappointed that members of our own parliamentary party staged a coup, effectively, and undermined the authority of the Prime Minister.
I don't think we should be talking about coups and, I think that sort of language is just too inflammatory.
The next 10 days, of course, is a critical period. That goes without saying.
So against that backdrop, the most ignominious perhaps for any incoming Tory leader, Liz Truss will try to re-establish her authority over the party. It'll be a fairly short speech, perhaps less than half an hour. We're not expecting any policy announcements. You're probably going to hear the word growth a lot. She'll say there needs to be an end to drift and delay and justify the economic turmoil of recent weeks. Whenever there is change, there is disruption. So, welcome again to Birmingham on the final day of the Conservative Party conference and, of course, Leaders' Speech Day for Prime Minister Liz Truss. Can she re-establish her authority with this speech? So let's start with you, Stephen.
No, I mean, look, ultimately, I think unless she invents time travel during this speech, it's going to be very hard to undo the political damage of the last 10 days in a speech alone. But she can use it to make a big argument and in some ways to take her party on over some of the things that have caused the problems therein.
Chris?
I think she may want to say sorry. I tried to do too much too quickly. I'm a Tory like you. I want to cut taxes. I just got quite overexcited maybe. A month ago, Boris Johnson was still leader. Would he have done this? Probably not. I'm trying to get growth going fast. I made a mistake. Forgive me. Let's go on together.
So would you like to hear some contrition?
Yes, definitely. And so would Tory MPs.
Would that be the right thing to do in order for Liz Truss to re-establish and reassert her authority over her party?
Well, I think actually in great part she did already do that with the comments she made earlier in the week at the opening stages of conference to say that it could have been prepared better. And I think that's fair. And for me, actually, it was also very important to be able to acknowledge when something had been done wrong. And so in the case of the 45p tax rate, she did that and then said, now let's try our best to deliver this really important package.
There is a problem, though. You use the 45 pence tax rate policy, and we've concentrated on that an awful lot. But on the key issues, there has been division and disagreement, and not just amongst backbenchers, but in the cabinet, in her serving ministers. Not you, perhaps, but many of your colleagues. Keep the 45 pence tax rate or scrap it. Keep the fiscal statement on the 23rd of November or bring it forward. Particularly pertinent for you, uprate benefits in line with inflation or not. The King should go to COP27 or he shouldn't. What's happened to clear messaging from this government?
Well, I think you heard the Foreign Secretary touch on this morning, and I think it would be better if we concentrated on the job in hand, because people need us to do a huge amount of work for them in the country at the moment. We're in very anxious times for people. We've got serious amounts of policy to be able to deliver, to try to make change for people, and I think it's greatly better if we were all focused on that.
Can you carry on like this, though, in the way that I've just described, with cabinet ministers particularly saying different, opposing, contradictory things to each other?
Well, that is clearly not a preferable way of doing it. And what I would say to my colleagues, but also to the party members who've been here this week, we are a united party. We have an enormous job to do to deliver for the British people who voted Conservative in 2019, who I have every confidence will want to vote Conservative again in the future. And we need to deliver for them, and we do that best together.
Are people listening in the cabinet?
Well, they are listening. I think to your point, Chloe, the problem is that coalition which Boris Johnson constructed is a very valuable election mandate which has been frittered away by this government by almost ignoring parts of northern England. I mean, those regeneration zones are all very well, but these big tax cuts announced 10 days ago really helps the south and benefits other people who aren't this coalition which Johnson built.
Is there an open debate now going on in public? I mean, you might expect divisions behind the scenes and in cabinet meetings, but this is being played out every day in public. What has happened to collective responsibility?
I think two things have happened. The first is ultimately when the polls don't look good for a political party, people start thinking about a change of leadership, they start profiling, they start fighting in public. The second thing is because of the nature of the U-turn over the 45p rate, many people feel that they've been taught that if they shout, make a spectacle of themselves, they'll get a policy change.
I mean, isn't that the case, that actually there has been a U-turn and cabinet ministers feel free to freelance? And that's because Liz Truss doesn't have the authority to keep them quiet.
No, I don't think that is the case. I think what you'll hear from the Prime Minister in 20 minutes' time is certainly an authoritative speech, which is something that everybody will want to be able to get behind, because the key point is the one I've already made. We have a job to do. This is not about us in this hall. This is not about everybody here in the bubble at this particular party conference. This is about the ordinary people that we need to deliver for.
But why then do you have the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, actually saying, I like the 45 pence tax rate being scrapped. I don't want it reinstated after it's already been announced that it is going to go. Why have you got her talking about coups on the backbenches? Is that the sort of thing you want to hear?
I can't speak for Suella, and she will be able to justify her own use of words and position there. But the point is this: we've got a very strong growth package there. Now, having acknowledged that one element of it was not a good approach, and as I say, the Prime Minister, I think, did that very openly, and I think that's fair. What we've then got is actually the strong part of a package still to deliver, and I think that will be really transformational when we're able to get growth going. Because for me, talking from my brief in particular, this is all about jobs. You know, the proof point that you'll see here is when we are able to help people in every part of our country be able to be into greater opportunity, and that means jobs.
I'm going to talk to you, of course, about your brief and about your department, about that issue of uprating benefits. But let's introduce the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason, who has just joined us on set. We've just been talking about whether Liz Truss can re-establish her authority. We've seen these disagreements literally playing out hour by hour almost, certainly yesterday. Can this speech turn it around for her?
Probably not, is the honest truth, I suspect, in reality, for a leader who's had a really, really bumpy few days and an extraordinary first 4 weeks where any of the talk of choreography over the summer hasn't played out as they would have imagined, to put it very bluntly. Obviously, things derailed by that period of mourning. And then coming into a conference where there's just been open dysfunction and open disagreement. I mean, that's just been the reality. The kind of stuff, Joe, that normally us as journalists might hear very quietly in a discreet corner of a bar, I mean, there's still a lot of that chat going on, by the way, has just burst out in public. Firstly, the row about tax, then yesterday, the row about benefits. And the extraordinary thing in that row about benefits, where you had a cabinet minister advocating a different position from the official government position. You then had another cabinet minister and the Home Secretary talking about a coup. That kind of language serving to rile the very backbenchers who were saying, no, it's not a coup. We're doing what we're paid to do, to represent our conscience and our constituents. So you've seen that playing out very publicly. And what we've got now, I think, is a party asking itself big questions about whether it can hang together. It's as blunt as that right now.
Can it hang together, Chloe?
Yes, absolutely. We are, if I may say, and reflecting on the conference and all of the members and activists and hardworking members of this broader family that have been here this conference, we are a strong and successful and indeed very historic party. And conferences are really important for people coming together. That, on the members and activists side, has been a really strong...
Well, that's the members and activists, but we heard Grant Shapps, the former Transport Secretary, basically giving Liz Truss 10 days to turn this around. That doesn't sound like a party or a government that's holding together.
That's for him to say. I'm not commenting on what others have said. I'm going to do my bit for unity and sensible conversation here this morning by focusing on the things that we need to be able to deliver.
Well, it may be a very lonely position to be in just at the moment.
It's one I'm very happy to be in. I'm a team player and we should all be getting on with the job here.
Well, we heard from Chris the other Chris, that actually he'd like to hear some contrition, some more contrition, not just the "we should have laid the ground better," the phrase that Liz Truss used at the beginning of conference, but a real apology for how things have unfolded and played out to the people here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there will be a reference, I hear, to the whole tax about turn. Quite how directly that is addressed will be interesting. And yeah, I suspect there is a mood from quite a lot of Conservative activists for some sort of level of contrition and some sort of sense of how the party binds itself back together, because that sense of kind of civil war breaking out publicly, I hesitate to use language like that because it seems, oh, here we go, it's a journalist with typical hyperbole. But actually, I think it does fairly describe what we're seeing happening at the moment. And that concern, to use a phrase that was just used to me by a very senior figure just now, that the party's becoming a circular firing squad on itself.
Right. I mean, if you're hearing these sorts of phrases, as we all have been this week, but it sort of raises the question, could there really be another leadership contest? I mean, you just said this is what happens a little bit earlier, Stephen, when people are worrying about the polls. But we've just had a leadership contest. We've just witnessed it. Is that what we're looking at again?
I was just speaking to a couple of very senior people in the last couple of hours. This was exactly the topic of conversation. The view being, I think at the moment, amongst almost all of even the Prime Minister's biggest critics, that it would be utterly absurd to get rid of a leader you've only just elected and try and convince the country that you could have yet another Prime Minister who wasn't the one who was the figurehead of the party at the last general election. And so what people are beginning to say is either the party kind of comes together around the new Prime Minister, or you're looking at a situation where there could be election much sooner than the current timetable of the next two and a half years. And the hope from those, and there isn't much hope around, by the way, privately, but the hope amongst those who want to see the Prime Minister succeed and some level of stability return is that MPs who are very fearful looking at those polls will conclude that it is better to hang around for another 2 years and hope things get a little better than be plunged into an election sooner rather than later where the polls would suggest annihilation for the Conservative Party. But that's the kind of conversation that is happening pretty openly. I mean, some of it publicly, a lot more of it privately, about how this party attempts to approach the coming weeks in the light of what's happened over the last couple of days.
Are you fed up, Chloe, that this is where your party, your government is, that this is the talk at the end of a conference, which is always supposed to be a sort of a hurrah, a honeymoon period for someone like Liz Truss? Are you angry at your colleagues that are fighting openly?
I just think this is bubble talk, and if you don't mind me saying that, I think this is a conversation that Westminster and occasionally conference venues might like to have. But what we've got to focus on is our constituents, it's the residents in every town up and down the country that we are delivering for. And just going back to what was in the growth plan, there's really important stuff there that matters to real people. The energy price guarantee.
This is more than bubble talk. This is open conversation amongst your colleagues, some of it very publicly, and you know that this is happening privately, real concern about the very stability of the government. That's a real discussion here, isn't it? You must acknowledge that.
I'm not arguing on that point with you, Chris. I'm saying what is more important than that is to focus on the people who need us to be able to support them with the cost of living, and that's why I'm just about to try to emphasise the energy price guarantee there. This is a really important policy. The last thing people need at a time that is very anxious and at a time when there's great concern about prices and economic factors is yet more turmoil and destabilisation. So my call would be, let's focus on the things that matter and make sure we're actually doing what we're here to do as politicians.
All right, and we'll come and talk about the substance and whether actually you can get a sort of line out to the voters on your policies because of all the noise created by your colleagues. Chris Mason, thank you very much. You're going to go into the hall shortly for the speech. Listening to, is that where we are? Is it bubble talk, as Chloe is saying, or is it really much more serious?
It's much more serious. I mean, look at the polls. There's a 7 percentage point swing in over 9 polls in the 3 days after the announcement of the mini budget and before even the U-turn. I mean, this is a John Curtis figure, so he's the guy who knows what's going on. I mean, it is alarming, I think. This week is meant to be the easy week, when it was a honeymoon period talking about tax cuts and there's a new leader here in Liz we trust. Instead, it's descended into chaos. And the cuts, the big stuff, of the spending cuts to calm the markets haven't even started yet. So that's what I'd worry about. It's been bad this week. It's going to get worse for the party.
Stephen?
Yeah, well, it's both, isn't it? Right. Chloe's exactly right. Then ultimately, this is semi-irrelevant to the big challenges facing the government, but it's very real because it's why it looks like the government can't tackle the challenges facing the government.
Right, well, let's look at one of those, and that is about benefits and whether they should rise in line with prices, with inflation, or with earnings. You got advice from the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, we've mentioned her a few times, to cut benefits. She wants to cut welfare. Your other Cabinet colleague, Penny Mordaunt, Leader of the House, is saying, no, they should rise in line with inflation. Which way are you going to go?
Well, I'm actually quite pleased to have an opportunity to talk about this in a slightly calmer manner, and aside from some of the speculation that's been
created by your colleagues, yes.
The fact of the matter is, there is a statutory process here. I, as Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, undertake an annual review of benefits and pensions. That happens in late October. It doesn't happen yet. In other words, there hasn't been an answer that could have been given to any of your colleagues who've asked for this week, because it has to use data that is only just coming available. So it's a very normal and, dare I say, boring process that takes place shortly. My priority going into that is to protect the most vulnerable. That's what you would expect from the Department for Work and Pensions. But it's also, I think, what you can expect from a government whose record here is having made sure that people have support through the cost of living concerns, the energy price guarantee I've just mentioned. But all of that is the kind of priority that is, for me, in that important.
You're right, it is a slightly technical answer, because actually one of the important consequences of the certain amount of chaos that we've been talking about is that actually people are fearful. People are worried. People on benefits don't know what is going to happen as inflation is topping 10%. People's mortgage payments have already gone up, and they are expected to go even higher. Real-life consequences to all of this that's been created by you and your colleagues. Do you accept that?
Well, indeed, and this is the point I've been making earlier this morning in this very discussion. People are anxious at a time like this, and it might be reassuring to remember that actually it's already set in primary legislation that certain benefits rise with inflation.
Certain ones do, but what about universal credit?
Disabled people. And this is where then we need to be able to allow me and my department to be able to do our statutory uprating decision using the right data.
Right. What about you? What about you, as the Work and Pension Secretary, actually stating clearly, like your Cabinet colleagues don't seem to be holding back in any way on this answer, reassuring people by saying we're going to uprate benefits, universal credit in line with inflation?
And the reassurance I'm giving you right here and right now, and I'm happy to continue to do so, is that my priority is to protect the most vulnerable, whilst also, of course, echoing what we... Excuse me 1 second, just to finish a very important point, whilst also, of course, ensuring that we support the way that the plan for growth is there to help people move into jobs and into work.
Is that reassuring?
It could be. Are you saying that you might have some benefits go up by inflation, some by earnings? You disaggregate some where the most vulnerable get the biggest increases and others don't?
What I'm saying is, as I've already set out, the facts of the matter are there is an exercise to be done. It can't be done yet because I need to use the latest data.
Stephen?
Well, look, the policy problem here is we already have some of the lowest benefits in the OECD. We're heading into a time where we would expect the benefits bill to rise anyway because of the economic situation. And seeing as we've had a pretty clear signal from the markets that you can't have unfunded tax cuts, there are going to be some very painful trade-offs around welfare, particularly when the party, for obvious reasons, doesn't want to touch the pensions part of the bill.
Do you accept that? I mean, there are going to be cuts. We've looked at the figures. If it's not your department, which department is it going to be, or should it be?
Well, and I think you've heard the Chancellor on this point in making the very reasonable point that we are going to have to ensure that there is fiscal sustainability. That's exactly right. And so, therefore, this is a process and a set of decisions that all departments will be part of.
Well, let me just show you this from the former Culture Secretary, Nadine Dorries. She tweeted, "We have no mandate from the people to do this, the policies that Liz Truss and the government have set out. Conservative government elected on the basis of a manifesto. It's how democracy works. People voted in 2019 on the policy promises we made, and for Boris, if we don't want to deliver on the deal, the promises, we need a fresh mandate." What would you say to Nadine Dorries?
Well, once again, I'm not commenting on any colleagues' other words. That's not my job here to do this morning. But I don't think that what's needed at a very anxious time is a further general election straight away. I don't think that would help people. I think that would cause further anxiety. And instead, what I'd like to see the Prime Minister do, and what you'll hear from her in the hall in just a second, is how we are delivering on that trust.
What is her mandate, though? What is her mandate? Who's her mandate from? 160, 170,000 Conservative Party members. Nadine Dorries is right. There is no mandate, is there?
That's not correct. The truth is that at the 2019 election, a lot of people put their trust in the Conservative Party. I'm very grateful that they did, and I, for one, am absolutely determined to repay that trust.
I mean, is there a mandate?
Well, not on some areas that came out last week. I've been walking around with this blue document, Plan for Growth. That's the new mandate, because in there is all the detail of what the government's doing at the moment. But there are some areas which weren't at all voted on in 2019, and that's what Nadine Dorries is getting towards.
Right. I mean, talk of an election. I mean, it is a former member of the Cabinet, but somebody who supported Liz Truss.
Well, yeah, look, one of the problems in Liz Truss's leadership campaign, and indeed one of the problems the Tory party as a whole has, is that it's not clear that the parliamentary party can unify around anything, right? People like Nadine Dorries were saying they didn't like Rishi Sunak's tax rises. Well, now they don't like the spending cuts that you have to have if you want to have these tax cuts. They don't like inflation, they don't like interest rates. It's not clear to me if there is something that the Conservative Party wants to unify around, and that is, you know, in many ways, a much bigger problem than any of the missteps Liz Truss has made over the last fortnight.
Chris?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a big concern, and I think that there's a degree of, if that's called cakeism, it might be called cakeism in some words, in terms of having your cake and eating it, for some of the critics. But I think the problem is that the person who bestrode the party, left and right wing, is gone, and the party's gone to the right, and what is the middle ground doing now?
Chloe Smith, I think we have to let you go. Work and Pension Secretary, thank you very much for joining us today. We've got about 15 minutes until Liz Truss's speech, the first as leader and Prime Minister, and it has been something of a torrid week. Of course, it's not helped today by the fact that there are train strikes on, so many people have left conference in order to get home yesterday. I mean, what sort of reception do you think she's going to get when she goes into the hall?
I think they'll be keen to make it work for her, because these are the members, most of whom who voted for her. They want it to work for her. They recognise that, I mean, how on earth you get another leader before Christmas? Most people telling me it might be an appointed leader, disregarding what the members want. But I think they'll be wanting it to work. I think I heard her give a good speech earlier this week at the party for the 1922 committee. When she's amongst friends and relaxes, she is quite fluent and drew a good line between tax cuts in the city, growing the pie, and levelling up regions. So she is. There's an idea in there. We want to see more of that governing the whole country.
I mean, she said herself that she is happy to take unpopular decisions and that she herself will press ahead with this going for growth. But going for growth at any cost. What does that mean, do you think, Stephen?
Well, what part of the problem is she's not going for growth at any cost, right? She's not going to rejoin the single market. She's not going to loosen immigration.
Please.
Look, she's, there are a bunch of things. There are a bunch of things that the parliamentary party won't wear, and one of the big problems here is that it's hard to see how you can reconcile an unashamed pro-growth agenda with the electoral coalition the Conservatives assembled in 2019.
Right. I mean, do you agree with that? That is the problem, as you say, being able to hold on to those seats in those parts of the country that had voted Labour for decades, and what we would also call the blue wall, the traditional sort of Shire Conservative seats, that coalition is fracturing.
And the very frustrations that Boris Johnson created by not being clear what he wanted, he would never have cut the 45p tax rate. That would not have happened with Boris Johnson. He would have sort of talked about it a lot and tried to keep everyone happy.
Right, but it's interesting, isn't it, that people view Boris Johnson partly through the lens of the pandemic as someone who was perhaps a bigger state Conservative. You heard Kwasi Kwarteng earlier this week saying, I want people to keep more of their money. I want them to make the decisions over how to spend their money. I want government to get out of people's way. These are sort of, if you like, traditional Conservative phrases that perhaps we didn't hear and maybe people aren't quite ready for, particularly in those former Red Wall areas.
Yeah, I think that's the big problem in some ways, right? The Conservative Party was desperate when they turned to Boris Johnson, and they were therefore willing to be led quite far into the political centre. Then they've basically gone, look, we're sick of not using our majority. Now they're trying to use the majority to do some quite right-wing things, and the MPs with small majorities are going, and MPs with big majorities looking at the polls are going, shucks, this looks bad for me. And so that's why they're in this political mess.
Right, and is that what will, in the end, if it does indeed trigger some sort of, if not challenge, some sort of, to use Suella Braverman's word, even though it's been condemned, some sort of coup.
Yeah, I mean, Q's quite an inflammatory word, but she said it on my podcast yesterday.
She did.
But yeah, I think that. But I mean, she got at least 3 or 4 or 5, I think, ovations from the audience in that tent where I hold this podcast, and they do love her. She does talk their language. I think part of the problem is that the party spent all of August having these 12 hustings around the country. You went to some of them, talking to each other, and I think that the Number 10 thought they emerged from that and they thought the rest of the country was listening, was ready for what was coming, but no one was. That half of them were on holiday, I hope. So they came out with these plans, squeeze in after the Queen's mourning period, and no one's ready for it. And that's the problem. But I think what she's doing, I would say, to be positive, time is on her side. She can go long in 2024. If green shoots do start to emerge, if we start growing...
In terms of growth.
Yes, and if the war ends or becomes a position in Ukraine where the gas supplies are eased, are start happening again in Europe, inflation falls. These are all ifs, but I mean, there's I think she has time on her side, and growth can happen. But we are not in a good place now for the party.
What about the politics? Because that relationship between Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss, Chancellor and Prime Minister, said to be very, very close. They really agree on the sort of economic prospectus, and yet it was a difficult start to the week. And yesterday, Liz Truss struggled at the beginning when asked whether she trusted her Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, which was bizarre, really, Stephen. I mean, or is there a sense that things perhaps aren't as rosy then at the top, even between the two of them?
Well, yeah, because one of the big selling points for them in the leadership was their very close political relationship. But, you know, when the economy's bad and the politics are bad, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister will always have friction. And, you know, this relationship in that respect is no different to any other.
Right, well, look, let's just show you this headline in the Daily Mail. Truss has broken the first rule of politics. Keep your friends close, but your enemies, like my ex-husband Michael Gove, even closer. Do you agree with Sarah?
Well, yes, she's right. I mean, to be fair to Liz Truss, Michael Gove walked away. He wasn't fired by anybody. Say Grant Shapps was fired, for example, and he's around the conference hall. I know what she means, and there's a big concern because I think when you get back next week, you'll see all sorts of different cohorts within the Tory party concerned. There'll be the ones who are sacked, who are angry with Liz Truss. The Sunakites who have been excluded, the Red Wallers who are going, what's going on? The 19 intake who think, why does no one love us? And all that is raised against her. Yes, she should try and appoint more allies and more people from across the party to help her.
Right, we'll just show you some pictures from inside the hall. Getting Britain moving. Nadeem Zahawi, Cabinet Minister, has just finished talking, and of course there'll be an introductory video, as there always is, and we're told that Liz Truss is going to come onto stage to a 90s classic. It did immediately make me think, though, of Theresa May 2018 here in Birmingham coming on to Dancing Queen, which I have to say surprised everybody at the time. In terms of keeping your friends and enemies even closer, was it a mistake not to include more people in the cabinet or in ministerial positions who were perhaps Rishi Sunak supporters?
Yeah, look, one of the problems the Tory party has had since the election victory is while the majority is bigger than any they've enjoyed since '87, it's not that large in historic terms, and there are an awful lot of sacked ministers on the backbenches, which makes it even harder. It would have been good, I think, to bring a couple of people in, a couple of people who'd been languishing on the backbenches under Boris Johnson as well, just to indicate that this was a government where loyalty might be rewarded and where there was a way back.
Chris?
Yes, but the argument against that is they immediately become Resignation Watch. They come on your programme, you know what they believe in. They're asked questions. I mean, I thought Penny Mordaunt, who was the minister who talked about doing an inflation increase, not an earnings increase in benefits, of course, narrowly lost out in the leadership. There could be a bit of issues there between her and the PM. I'm sure there's not. I'm sure they're professional, but you know, she was nearly leader, and I think that wouldn't have helped. I wonder whether the song might be "Things Can Only Get Better," Joe. By the way.
Well, I think that's already been used, hasn't it? Once before, and not by the Conservative Party. We're being told it might be moving on up, so we'll have to keep an ear out for when that actually starts. In terms of people, though, in terms of support, do we need to go back to the fact that actually the majority of MPs did not support Liz Truss during that leadership contest, and that is now a problem?
Yeah, it's a big problem. And essentially, of all of the three candidates, the top three candidates had a third, and a third of the parliamentary party. She had this disparate coalition where she was able to unify the right, but only very grudgingly behind her. And look, The central problem here is that the party is not united. She doesn't need, I think, to be contrite. She needs to win her civil war if she's going to govern effectively.
And if the growth works, they will come back. So right now, it looks very difficult. I would argue, also, I would say that Keir Starmer, who is miles ahead, on course for a three-figure majority if there's an election tomorrow, he's done very little for Tories to win their support. So I think it could be the Tories hope it's quite a soft lead, even though it's a big one.
Right, and do you think that's right? I mean, is there some hope in Tory ranks that that is the case? Although it's huge, the lead, that it might not be as solid as it seems.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the reasons why she's under some pressure, right? If it looked solid, people would go, look, we've just got to unify and try and minimise the damage. But people go, look, Keir Starmer's big achievement has been making the Labour Party non-scary. He's getting votes by default. We can therefore win those votes back very easily. So that is where most of the parliamentary party is, I think.
But we've heard that we're going to hear words like brutal party discipline for people that freelance. This is outside the cabinet, Michael Gove and Grant Shapps. I mean, again, it's very strong language. Is that the sort of language that you would use to unify a party?
Well, no, but I think discipline is important. I mean, they've got to pull together. I mean, next week, I'm sure that she will be meeting her MPs en masse on Tuesday to say, right, here we go. I think Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, and the MPs who aren't really here, by the way,
I know, no,
haven't
many
even
of them
seen their
haven't come.
Chancellor since he did a U-turn on the main part or the big headline-grabbing part of that mini-budget.
I mean, that's the point. Next week, of course, as you were saying, Chris, earlier, it could be even more difficult because then we're at the stage of having legislation being laid out, policy announcements being put forward, because Liz Truss has promised this raft of deregulation, this supply-side reform. What chance has that got of actually getting through if they knew and they were told that they couldn't get through the 45p tax rate policy?
Well, the supply-side stuff is easier to pass because it doesn't have any direct losers in Parliament right up front. But the big problem will be the stuff on planning. Right?
Yes, well, that's... well, what do you... Well, I mean, that is the point.
Well, I mean, already they're dusting down their trowels and getting a bit fired up, the rebels, on planning.
All right, well, let's have a look at Liz Truss and her husband, Hugh O'Leary. They were making their way earlier on, as is the tradition for party leaders, and in this case, the Prime Minister, walking across the bridge there here in Birmingham from the hotel over to the conference hall. Well, looking pretty confident there, as Kwasi Kwarteng was a few days ago.
Dress colour, Joe?
Terracotta,
OK, got it.
I think, at first glance, making her way in. And, of course, she does say that she is confident and she will face down her critics. It's interesting that it's such a short speech. I mean, 90 minutes was Keir Starmer's longest, and that was very long. 25 minutes feels quite short to me.
Well, I think, look, given the thing that she really will not want to happen is for anything she says in her speech to cause the market to react adversely, given that the party is very divided, and I imagine that she will not do a sort of, you need to unify behind me, she will do the we need to come together, all that kumbaya stuff. All of that leads you towards a short, succinct, nothing people can get angry about, nothing markets can be alarmed about. That will be the hope. I suspect she probably will fail at least one of those times.
Well, I mean, is that the case? I mean, it's a little bit like Kwasi Kwarteng earlier in the week, also short. The mini-budget was short, although that obviously created an awful lot of reaction and news. I mean, they've been so shaken, haven't they, by market reaction, which they think is slightly unfair.
Well, we were expecting, when Kwasi Kwarteng spoke, that with the...
Just going to say, sorry, Chris, to interrupt. You can see the cabinet here filing in. There is Penny Mordaunt, leader of the House, who we're talking about, party chairman. There, Jake Berry, and that's Liz Truss's husband at the end, who's not a member of the cabinet, just to be clear, taking their seats. James Cleverly, there, the Foreign Secretary, next to Kwasi Kwarteng, and Suella Braverman. And that's Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary. We haven't seen a lot of Ben Wallace, who was at one point talked about as being a potential contender.
Yes, I think defence is an area which isn't really controversial. I mean, all sides of the House want to support Ukraine. I think that there's...
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Well, they all want to support Ukraine. It's not really an area where there's a battle. But, of course, it could be a spending debate going forward, which we haven't even got towards.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. The 3% pledge, when we're talking about spending cuts, which the Institute for Fiscal Studies said could amount to up to something like £18 billion. But it's not going to be in defence, is it?
No, and actually, look, a real problem is because of what's happening, the strength of the dollar, the weakness of the pound, a lot of the defence spend is actually in dollars. So in order to actually get the quality of equipment you need and not just hit a percentage target, the defence budget may have to grow, and that will, of course, put further pressure on other budgets if they want to have these tax cuts as well.
And it couldn't be in health either. We've just seen Thérèse Coffey, the effective Deputy Prime Minister and Health Secretary. There won't be cuts there.
There'll be no more money for health. I'm pretty certain on that. I'm looking at the backdrop there. I think the letters can't fall off it this time. Do you remember when Theresa May's speech went wobbly quickly?
I'll never forget
it. Looks like it's projected onto the backdrop, so at least the stage is safe.
So you think the choreography will be absolutely fine?
It will matter. She can't slip, can't fall, anything like that. It will be a big issue if anything goes wrong, because she'll become this hapless Prime Minister very quickly, and she's got to try and project authority, I think.
Well, you can see them all chatting there together amongst themselves. There's Michelle Donelan, the Culture Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, focusing, obviously awaiting Liz Truss, and the Education Secretary there, Kit Malthouse. They look relaxed.
Yeah.
And I suppose you would expect them to be. But it is strange, this feeling that Liz Truss has only been Prime Minister for a number of weeks, and to be in this much hot water, potentially, with her own party.
Yeah, it's an unprecedented collapse for a leader. That, of course, adds to all the problems we've been talking about. And it means that, I mean, look, I think one thing that's indicative is we are, unsurprisingly, all giving them marks for doing the bare minimum in a conference, which is not looking like they're rowing in public on television, because they haven't managed to clear that bare minimum for quite a lot of this conference.
I mean, but also they have been in power, the Conservatives, since 2010. Is this also fatigue, in a sense, that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng are trying to create change, when in fact this is another Conservative government?
Yes, the party's like a snake that sheds its skin every so often, becomes a new thing all the time, and that's the concern, that they are trying to reinvent the party in real time and policy, and the risk has been they will now be blamed for the next interest rate rise. That's what's going to happen. So when that goes up, I mean, it will be global markets contributed to that, but they'll be blamed in part for the increase.
Well, they'll be blamed because, of course, the interest rate decision came, or the Bank of England's intervention came very shortly after that mini-budget. But in terms of trying to reinvent themselves, is it just almost impossible to do after 12 years?
Yeah, it gets more difficult. You have more sacked people on the backbenches. You have people who are very invested in the decisions that we made. But also, look, one of the reasons why it's so hard for them to make any further cuts is because we did have, from 2010 to 2016, some very radical reductions in the size of the state, and that is one of the reasons why it's harder. It's harder for governments to do things the longer they're in office. It was hard for Labour in 2010, hard for the Conservatives in 1997. Maybe we're in that kind of position again. Who knows?
Will the public wear it, though?
Well, they'll have to. It's the only choice they've got. I mean, Liz Truss was sitting on the screen there. She is now polling as badly as Boris Johnson was at the depths of Partygate. I mean, the party must look at itself and go, what have we done? What's the point of all this? Because they've lost this. I liken it to the ringmaster in the circus has left the tent, and the lions are eating the acrobats one by one. I mean, it's chaotic. No one's in charge.
I mean, the pandemic, of course, also led to one of the biggest interventions before the energy intervention, that was with furlough. And that, again, in the public's mind, has meant that they expect government, to some extent, do you think, to step in the way that the government would argue its energy intervention package does, but it's been overshadowed completely by the £45 billion worth of unfunded tax cuts?
Yeah, one of the big problems is that the government has had to use the extraordinary fiscal power of the central bank for quite a lot of things. There's a lot of pressure on public finances, and I think it does create that sense that the government can fix things, but it also creates irritation in the Conservative Party. I think for some MPs, they almost feel like they deserved these tax cuts as a little treat because they'd had to do all of this quite lefty stuff for the last couple of years.
Well, you said at the beginning, maybe they did do things too quickly, too much, all at once.
That was meant to be an energy announcement. It became a Christmas tree upon which they hung all these baubles, which weren't really required. Stamp duty, corporation tax. There was no need to do all this stuff at that time, 45p. There was no need for it. Bankers' bonuses, no need for it, because there are other events that could do that. I mean, why you couldn't wait till the March budget ahead of an April increase on 45p and prepare the ground now. But they ran before they could walk, and they're fallen over on their face.
And that's because they said they were in a hurry, because the next election could be 2024. I mean, is that understandable?
Well, I think also, considering that they have struck a more conciliatory note on the Northern Ireland Protocol. They have done these quite controversial. I think they needed to do something for the right of the party in order to keep everyone on side. So there was some pressure to do these cuts as well internally.
Right, and strikes, of course. I mean, Anne-Marie Trevelyan has, of course, had some contact, unlike her predecessor, Grant Shapps, when it comes to dealing with...
I was told last week at the Labour conference by a very senior Union General Secretary that 1 million public sector workers, more than 1 million, will be balloted for strike action by Christmas. That hasn't even happened yet. You mentioned Northern Ireland Protocol. I mean, that's the big parliamentary battle between Lords and Commons. There's no space for this stuff, but it needs to happen.
Let's just go into the hall. They're standing. They're welcoming on Liz Truss. There she is. Let's go into the hall.
My friends, it's great to be with you here in Birmingham. It's fantastic to see the cranes across the skyline building new buildings, the busy trams coursing down the streets, and the bull standing proudly at the heart of Birmingham. My friends, this is what a city with a Tory mayor looks like. It's positive, it's enterprising, it's successful, and Andy Street is a human dynamo, delivering for the people of Birmingham. And our Teesside Mayor, Ben Houchin, is also delivering new jobs and investment. This is what modern conservatism looks like. Let's get Tory mayors elected in London, in Manchester, in West Yorkshire, and right across our great country. We gather at a vital time for the United Kingdom. These are stormy days. Together, we've mourned the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the rock on which modern Britain was built. We're now in a new era under King Charles III. We're dealing with the global economic crisis caused by COVID and by Putin's appalling war in Ukraine. In these tough times, we need to step up. I'm determined to get Britain moving, to get us through the tempest, and to put us on a stronger footing as a nation. I'm driven in this mission by my firm belief in the British people. I believe that you know best how to spend your own money to get on in life and to realise your ambitions. My friends, that is what conservatism is about. It's a belief in freedom, in fair play, and the great potential of the British people. So I'm not going to tell you what to do, or what to think, or how to live your life. I'm not interested in how many 2-for-1 offers you buy at the supermarket, or how you spend your spare time, or in virtue signalling. I'm not interested in just talking about things, but actually in doing things. What I'm interested in is your hopes and fears that you feel every day. Can you get a good job locally? Is it safe to walk down the high street late at night? Can you get a doctor's appointment? I know how you feel because I have the same hopes and fears. I want what you want. I've fought to get where I am today. I've fought to get jobs, to get pay rises, and get on the housing ladder. I've juggled my career with raising 2 wonderful daughters. I know how it feels to have your potential dismissed by those who think they know better. I remember as a young girl being presented on a plane with a junior air hostess badge. Meanwhile, my brothers were given junior pilot badges. It wasn't the only time in my life that I've been treated differently for being female or for not fitting in. It made me angry, and it made me determined. Determined to change things so other people didn't feel the same way. I remember growing up in Leeds, where I saw too many children being let down by low expectations, let down by a Labour council who were more interested in political correctness than they were in school standards. But I was lucky to have been brought up in a family that cared about education. They taught me the value of hard work and enterprise. And I stand here today as the first Prime Minister of our country to have gone to a comprehensive school. That taught me 2 things. One is that we have huge talent across our country, and 2, that we're not making enough of it. This is a great country. I'm so proud of who we are and what we stand for. But I know that we can do better, and I know that we must do better. And that's why I entered politics. I want to live in a country where hard work's rewarded, where women can walk home safely at night, and where our children have a better future. To deliver this, we need to get Britain moving. We cannot have any more drift and delay at this vital time. Let's remember where we were when I entered Downing Street. Average energy bills were predicted to soar above £6,000 a year. We faced the highest tax burden that our country had had for 70 years. And we were told that we could do nothing about it. I didn't accept that things had to be that way. I knew that inaction would be unconscionable. Families would have been unable to heat their homes. Businesses would have gone bust. Jobs would have been lost. And we would have worse public services, including the NHS. I couldn't allow this to happen. I refused to consign our great country to decline. And that's why I promised on entering Downing Street to act. Let's get them removed. Now, later on in my speech, my friends, I'm going to talk about the anti-growth coalition. But I think they arrived in the hall a bit too early. They were meant to come later on, so we'll get on to them. We'll get on to them in a few minutes. But what we did is we acted. We made sure that the typical household energy bill shouldn't be more than around £2,500 a year this winter and next. We followed up with immediate action to support businesses over the winter. We're determined to shield people from astronomically high bills. So much so that we are doing more in this country to protect people from the energy crisis than any other country in Europe. Our response to the energy crisis was the biggest part of our mini-budget. It was the biggest part for a good reason, because we had to do it. But it's not the only challenge we face. For too long, our economy hasn't grown as strongly as it should have done. I know what it's like to live somewhere that isn't feeling the benefits of economic growth. I grew up in Paisley and in Leeds in the 80s and 90s. I've seen the boarded up shops. I've seen people left with no hope, turning to drugs. I've seen families struggling to put food on the table. Low growth isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Low growth means lower wages, fewer opportunities, and less money to spend on the things that make life better. It means our country falling behind other countries, including those who threaten our way of life. And it means the parts of our country that I really care about falling even further behind. That is why we must level up our country in a conservative way, ensuring everywhere, everyone can get on. Conference, it's wrong to invest only in the places that are thriving, as economic models often have it. We need to fund the furthest behind first. And for too long, the political debate has been dominated by the argument about how we distribute a limited economic pie. Instead, we need to grow the pie so that everyone gets a bigger slice. That is why I'm determined to take a new approach and break us out of this high-tax, low-growth cycle. And that's what our plan is about. It's about getting the economy growing and rebuilding Britain through reform. The scale of this challenge is immense. War in Europe for the first time in a generation. A more uncertain world in the aftermath of COVID, and a global economic crisis. That is why, in Britain, we need to do things differently. We need to step up. As the last few weeks have shown, it will be difficult. Whenever there's change, there is disruption. And not everybody will be in favour of change. But everyone will benefit from the result. A growing economy and a better future. That is what we have a clear plan to deliver. I have three priorities for our economy: growth, growth, and growth. Growth means more money in people's pockets. It means businesses creating new jobs. Growth means people can feel secure and they can plan for their future. Fundamentally, growth helps people fulfill their hopes and their dreams. And that's why our dynamic new Chancellor and I will be taking action in three areas. First of all, we will lower First of all, we will lower our tax burden. Over the summer, we had a robust debate, and the Conservative Party will always be the party of low taxes. Cutting taxes is the right thing to do, morally and economically. Morally, because the state doesn't spend its own money. It spends the people's money. Economically, because if people keep more of their own money, they're inspired to do more of what they do best. That's what grows the economy. When the government plays too big a role, people feel smaller. High taxes mean you feel it's less worthwhile working that extra hour, going for a better job, or setting up your own business. That's, my friends, is why we are cutting taxes. We've already cut stamp duty, helping people on the housing ladder, especially first-time buyers. We're reversing the increase in national insurance from next month. And we're keeping corporation tax at 19%, the lowest in the G20. We're also helping 31 million working people by cutting the basic rate of income tax. We need to be internationally competitive, with all our tax rates attracting the best talent. Cutting taxes helps us face the global economic crisis, putting up a sign that Britain is open for business. The fact is that the abolition of the 45p tax rate became a distraction from the major parts of our growth plan. That is why we're no longer proceeding with it. I get it, and I have listened. Secondly, we will keep an iron grip on the nation's finances. I believe in fiscal responsibility. I believe in getting value for the taxpayer. I believe in sound money and a lean state. I remember my shock opening my first paycheck to see how much money the taxman had taken out. I know this feeling is replicated across the country. And that's why we must always be careful with taxpayers' money. It's why this government will always be fiscally responsible. We are in extraordinary times. It would have been wrong not to have proceeded rapidly with our energy and tax plan. I am clear we cannot pave the way to sustainable economic growth without fiscal responsibility. So we will bring down debt as a proportion of our national income. We are seeing rising interest rates worldwide in the wake of Putin's war and COVID. The Federal Reserve has been hiking rates in America and has signalled more rises to come. Inflation is high across the world's major economies. We will do what we can as a government to support homeowners, such as cutting stamp duty. But it's right that interest rates are independently set by the Bank of England and that politicians do not decide on this. The Chancellor and the Governor will keep closely coordinating our monetary and fiscal policy. And the Chancellor and I are in complete lockstep on this. Thirdly, we will drive economic reforms to build our country for a new era. We're taking a new approach based on what's worked before. Previously, we faced barriers to growth like militant unions, nationalised industries, and outdated city regulation. Now we must break down the barriers to growth built up in our system over decades. Decisions take too long. Burdens on businesses are too high. Infrastructure projects get delayed for years and years and years. As a result, we've seen economic growth choked off. Houses haven't been built where they are needed and wanted, and we've become averse as a nation to doing things differently. I love business. I love enterprise. I love people who take responsibility, start their own businesses, and invest. They generate profits, they create new jobs, and they power our success. And I want to see more of that. That's why we will back business to the hilt. We're cutting taxes and we're simplifying red tape to help businesses realise their ambitions. And this is what our new investment zones will do, helping us level up across the country. We're going to be inspired by the great hubs of industry like Bourneville here in the West Midlands. And that's what zones in places like here and around the country will deliver. We want to create the zones in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Now is the time to harness the power of free enterprise to transform our country, ensure that our greatest days lie ahead. This is the United Kingdom at its best, working together and getting our economy growing. And we will face down the separatists who threaten to pull apart our precious union, our family. Next year, we will host the Global Investment Summit. This will show the world's top investors there's nowhere better to invest than the UK. And we're seizing the newfound freedoms outside the European Union. We're the party who got Brexit done, and we will realise on the promise of Brexit. We're building an economy which makes the most of the huge opportunities Brexit offers. By the end of the year, all EU red tape will be consigned to history. Instead, we will ensure that regulation is pro-business and pro-growth. Leaving the EU gives us the chance to do things differently, and we need more of that. That's why over the coming weeks, my team of ministers will set out more about what we're going to do to get Britain moving. We'll make it easier to build homes, to afford childcare, and to get superfast broadband. We'll help you set up your own business and get a mobile phone signal wherever you are in the country. We are in tough times, but I want you to know that day in, day out, I'm thinking about how we get this country moving. I'm working flat out to make sure people can get through this crisis. So let me be clear, we have your back. That is why the government took decisive action to tackle the energy crisis. It's why we're pushing ahead with our plan for growth. Economic growth makes life better and easier for everyone, and it will level up our country. I know this is what people want to see. Economic growth will mean that we can afford great public services, such as schools, the police, and the NHS. Our fantastic Deputy Prime Minister and Health Secretary will deliver for patients, so they can expect a GP appointment within 2 weeks. She will ensure that those who need urgent care will be seen on the same day. And she will get ambulances out there faster, and she will improve A&E. And she will bust the COVID backlog. That's not all. And she will bolster social care so everyone gets the care they need. We are working to put this country on the path to long-term success. That means ensuring we are safe and secure. One of the reasons we're facing this global crisis is because collectively the West did not do enough. We became complacent. We didn't spend enough on defense. We became too dependent on authoritarian regimes for cheap goods and cheap energy. And we did not stand up to Russia early enough. We will make sure this never happens again. So we are taking decisive action to reinforce our energy security. We're opening more gas fields in the North Sea and delivering more renewables and nuclear energy. This is how we will protect the Great British environment, deliver on our commitment to net zero, and tackle climate change. We're also taking decisive action by strengthening our borders and beefing up our border force and expanding the Rwanda scheme. Our brilliant new Home Secretary will be bringing forward legislation to make sure that no European judge can overrule us. And while she is acting, meanwhile, the Labour Party has absolutely no plan to tackle illegal immigration. But my friends, we cannot have security at home without security abroad. That's why our tough foreign and defence secretaries are updating the integrated review to make sure we can face down these threats. It's why we're increasing defence spending to 3% of GDP by the end of the decade. This will ensure that our armed forces are ready to tackle new and emerging threats. We're working with our friends and allies to support Ukraine in the face of Putin's brutal war. The brave Ukrainian people aren't just fighting for their security, but for all our security. This is a fight for freedom and democracy around the world. Putin's illegal annexation of Ukrainian territory is just the latest act in his campaign to subvert democracy and violate international law. We should not give in to those who want a deal which trades away Ukrainian land. They are proposing to pay in Ukrainian lives for the illusion of peace. We will stand with our Ukrainian friends, however long it takes. Ukraine can win, Ukraine must win, and Ukraine will win. I know that President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine will welcome our solidarity with them at this very, very difficult time. To take on Russia and other authoritarian regimes, free democracies need strong economies. Economic growth makes us strong at home and strong abroad. And we need an economically sound and secure United Kingdom. And that will mean challenging those who try to stop growth. I will not allow the anti-growth coalition to hold us back. Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP, the militant unions, the vested interests dressed up as think tanks, the talking heads, the Brexit deniers, Extinction Rebellion, and some of the people we had in the hall earlier. The fact is, they prefer protesting to doing. They prefer talking on Twitter to taking tough decisions. They taxi from North London townhouses to the BBC studio to dismiss anyone challenging the status quo. From broadcast to podcast, they peddle the same old answers. It's always more taxes, more regulation, and more meddling. Wrong, wrong, wrong. We see the anti-growth coalition at work across our country. Keir Starmer wants to put extra taxes on the companies we need to invest in our energy security. And his sticking plaster solution will only last 6 months. He has no long-term plan and no vision for Britain. Mark Drakeford in Wales is cancelling road building projects and refusing to build the M4 relief road. Nicola Sturgeon won't build new nuclear power stations to solve the energy crisis in Scotland. Have these people ever seen a tax rise they don't like? or an industry they don't want to control? They don't understand the British people. They don't understand aspiration. They are prepared to leave our towns and cities facing decline. My friends, does the anti-growth coalition have any idea who pays their wages? It's the people who make things in factories across our country. It's the people who get up at the crack of dawn to go to work. It's the commuters who get trains into towns and cities across our country. I'm thinking of the white van drivers, the hairdressers, the plumbers, the accountants, the IT workers, and millions of others up and down the UK. The anti-growth coalition just doesn't get it. It's because they don't face the same challenges as normal working people. These enemies of enterprise don't know the frustration you feel to see your road blocked by protesters or your trains off due to a strike. In fact, their friends on the hard left tend to be the ones behind the disruption. The anti-growth coalition think that people who stick themselves to trains, roads and buildings are heroes. I say the real heroes are the people who go out to work, take responsibility and aspire to a better life for themselves and their families. And I am on their side. We will build roads, rail, energy and broadband quicker. We will be proudly pro-growth, pro-aspiration and pro-enterprise. That is how we will forge ahead on our long-term path to national success. In this new era, we're taking a new approach. My friends, we're focused on boosting growth and opportunity across our country. This mission will be difficult, but it is necessary. We have no alternative if we want to get our economy moving again. I'm ready to make the hard choices. You can trust me to do what it takes. The status quo is not an option. That is why we can't give in to the voices of decline. We can't give in to those who say Britain can't go faster. We can't give in to those who say we can't do better. We must stay the course. We're the only party with a clear plan to get Britain moving. We're the only party with the determination to deliver. Together, we can unleash the full potential of our great country. That is how we will build a new Britain for a new era.
So Liz Truss has finished her speech. They're on their feet, as you would expect. She looks pleased or maybe relieved that she has come to the end of a speech that lasted just over half an hour. She ended her peroration saying, I'm prepared to make the hard choices and I won't give in. There she is being embraced by her husband as she goes out of the hall, passing the delegates there. But actually, of course, she did give in over that policy of the 45p tax rate and U-turned on scrapping it. She said, I get it. And I listened, but she said she is going to forge ahead with her difficult but necessary mission. We are taking a new approach and the status quo is not an option. Interestingly, when she did her personal story at the beginning of her speech, growing up in Leeds, she said she's the first Prime Minister to have gone to a comprehensive school. Presume that is a non-selective comprehensive school. Former Prime Ministers, of course, have been to grammar school. And then, just moments into her speech, there was that rather dramatic interruption and intervention by Greenpeace protesters who somehow managed to get into the hall with a rather large banner protesting about the government's policies, or as they see it, U-turns on pledges on green policy, one of them being fracking. She was interrupted, but she regained control quite quickly and actually referred to a passage later on in her speech, the Anti-Growth Coalition. She said, in fact, they turned up early into the hall. My guests are here. We've been joined by the BBC's Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young. Welcome to you. What did you make of it?
Well, I think, as you say, if part of it felt like she was just trying to get through it at some points after an incredibly difficult conference for her. But, you know, she was pretty adamant that she's carrying on. I mean, as you say, there was a slight sort of nod towards the troubles there have been, but not many. She didn't dwell on it, did she?
No.
And the real message is that there is no other option. We're going to do this and I'm going to do it. And it's when she was sort of talking directly to people watching and saying that, you know, I'm on your side, she's trying to, you know, make out that there are these, you know, two opposing camps, if you like, and she's in the one that is going to bring growth and help people because she says the country needs all of that. But, you know, there's not much dwelling either on the difficult things that are coming, talking about how she's going to be fiscally prudent, but actually not giving any detail about how she's going to do that. There's an awful lot of difficult things to come. But I think, given where she was now after these last few days, you know, she just had to get through that and show that she was determined to carry on, because even after such a short time as Prime Minister, there are people muttering about how long she's going to last as Prime Minister.
Well, let me also reintroduce my other guests here, Chris Hope from the Telegraph, Stephen Bush from the Financial Times. Has she done enough?
No, I don't think she has. I think the really thing which is interesting there is she's right to say there is an anti-growth coalition in the United Kingdom, and we saw some of the conservative, we saw some of the non-conservative opponents of that agenda in the hall. But some of the anti-growth coalition exists in the Tory party. And there was really nothing in that speech to take on her internal opponents, who are actually her most important ones because she has a majority, she has to secure her leadership, and I think the big missed opportunity in this speech was to say anything which any true blue Conservative might dislike.
Yeah, I think we haven't really learned anything from that speech. I mean,
there was no new. That was
no
no new
she
policy.
She didn't say sorry. She said, "I get it. I've listened." That's the nearest we're going to get from an apology. I thought might have cleared the air. She said, "I'm ready to make hard choices." That was the nearest we get to tee up a very difficult autumn of cuts for a lot of people. This idea of anti-growth coalition, for me, reminded the kind of vote leave, the blob, the kind of go thing of all these the enemies of Toryism. So she's channeling a lot of that Brexit energy, and the audience like that. And I think she couldn't get out the hall fast enough.
Oh, well, I'll tell you someone who is outside the hall and is talking to members who were listening to the speech, and that's my colleague, Ione Wells, BBC political correspondent. Over to you, Ione.
Yeah, Joe, the speech has just ended and the crowds, as you can see, are spilling out now. We've got a couple of members here who were there. What did you make of the speech?
Yes, I really liked it. I thought it was a brilliant speech. I thought it was very positive, positive message for the future, difficult times, and I think the Prime Minister covered all the main concerns, and I think it was a very positive speech. Really good.
It's been a very, very bumpy conference, hasn't it, for Liz Truss? Do you think it was enough to pull everybody back together, the members, the MPs who have been voicing their dissent over the last couple of days about her leadership so far?
Yeah, I think, well, for me, it's my first time coming to a conference, and I just found it very fascinating and interesting. There's lots of fringe meetings. I learned a lot. It was a positive experience for me. I don't know what it looked like from the outside. Obviously, there's the big news headlines, the 45 pence tax cut that went back again. That was probably a little glitch, but most of the all the economic plans are very positive in my view.
And we've got another member here joining us as well. What did you make of Liz Truss's speech?
I think the government making a commitment to a growth economy, and I'm looking very positive. And in less than 3 years, we will find a huge difference in UK. We are going back to the top.
Did you think Liz Truss did enough to win over some of the members in the crowd today?
I think so. We are going to win next election.
We've got a couple of other members coming out now who may be able to give some of their thoughts on the BBC. Can we ask you what you made of that speech, sir?
Oh, amazing. We're going for high growth, and this will enable us to get more jobs, more security, and pay off the national debt, which is costing us too much. And the future looks bright, and we don't want any distractions like we had. That was terrible, because Liz Truss deserves a fair chance, and she's going to make a great Prime Minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, some optimism there, Joe, as you can see post that speech. I think certainly one thing that might have united some of the people here were those protesters in the crowd. It certainly gave everybody something to unite behind after a few days of some quite apparent Tory divisions.
Ione Wells there talking to members. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to say we've been joined very quickly and swiftly out of the hall by the Deputy Prime Minister and Health Secretary Thérèse Coffey. What about those demonstrators, those protesters? First of all, that will have taken everyone by surprise. How did they get in?
I don't know. Disappointing, but never mind. Dealt with, got on with it. Liz showed her resolve, and exactly the sort of anti-growth coalition which she's concerned is holding our country back.
Well,
she didn't. It didn't hold her back today, I can tell you.
Well, you talk about the anti-growth coalition, or rather echoing what Liz Truss was saying, but actually isn't the point, although she's talking about opposition parties and groups that do not support the government's economic perspectives, but actually what about the anti-growth coalition within your own party? It is a coalition that is fracturing over all sorts of issues, whether it is the 45 pence tax rate policy, whether it is about increasing benefits in line with inflation or earnings. Isn't that the critical issue?
Actually, our parliamentary party is very united behind the growth plan.
It's the cabinet I'm talking.
There was that the 45p rate issue became too much of a distraction. It's gone. It's done. Dealt with. The focus is there. We supported with energy costs one of the biggest packages in the world, frankly. Over 6% of GDP. France was about 2% because businesses were at risk of going bust. That's not. We had to take action. We had to take decisive action. But Liz set out across the summer, she wants to be pro-growth. She wants to make sure that tax rates are there, which will bring in actually higher tax revenues. So instead of putting up taxes more, to make sure that we actually welcome enterprise. And I think the speech today set that out very clearly. Growth, growth, growth. And every department in government is a growth department.
Every department's a growth department. But actually on that key point that you want to reduce taxes, you want to cut taxes, you don't want to put them up, she caved in on that policy. And she's reversed it. So instead of cutting that 45 pence tax rate, instead of going for growth, if you like, she's reversed it. She gave in.
It was a minor part of aspects of the growth plan. Frankly, we are getting on with the rest of it. This is about investment zones. It's about making sure we can get infrastructure built. And frankly, not allowing other parts of the country, the growth coalition, the people who want to stop things being built, getting on with it.
Right.
Whether it's Mark Drakeford in Wales, whether it's about Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland. That's not how we are going to grow as a United Kingdom. And I'm really very conscious that this is an important time in our country's history. Frankly, around the world we united to get that vaccine, but we've still got the aftershock of COVID. We've got the huge problems with Russia's and Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So there's a number of things where I think Liz, when she was Foreign Secretary, and even more so now she's Prime Minister, is taking decisive action to get stuff done and to have that global leadership as well.
Right, except she reversed one key decision, so that wasn't decisive, if you like. And have your Cabinet colleagues got the memo that you are all behind the same thing? Suella Braverman was still saying after the policy had been ditched that she likes the policy. You know, we should have stuck to it. Simon Clarke, the Levelling Up Secretary, retweeted what she said. He too liked it. So what's going on here? What's gone on with party discipline in the Cabinet?
Well, it's no secret that the Conservative Party likes to have lower tax rates. However, distraction, done, dealt with, move on, and we will get our growth going.
Oh, well, on that, growth...
You're still talking about news from a few days ago, Jo. This is about the future and getting growth, and that's what the Prime Minister set out very clearly today.
I get it, and I have listened on that U-turn. She said growth, growth, growth.
Exactly.
She said it. How do you make it happen?
Well, as we've set out in our growth plan, it's about making sure that we're not increasing corporation tax rates right now, as happened in the past. That when we had lower corporation tax rates, the revenues went up. It's about making sure that we encourage investment in zones. That's why we want, as she said, the 21st century Bournevilles, the 21st century Port Sunlights, to get homes and jobs working together. And it is about making sure that we use taxpayers' money carefully and competently, and that is what we're going to do.
Of course, we haven't had any scrutiny of these plans, so we don't know. We haven't had any independent look or probing at the sorts of figures and the sorts of ideas that you put forward, because we didn't hear from the Office for Budget Responsibility, and we won't until the end of November. She also said we need to get a leaner state. How?
Well, understandably, we increased the size of the state, especially during COVID, because we needed to. We needed a national
And
response.
now you're going to cut it.
And now there are aspects that we no longer need to be doing in government. As she set out in a variety of ways, we have to get on a focus about growth, and that's why every department will be about growth and using taxpayers' money carefully to support that. But as she's also consistently set out, she wants to support people right across the country. As she said, those furthest behind are the people we want to help first. And that's exactly the sort of compassionate Conservative party and government that she is leading.
So you'll agree with Ian Duncan-Smith, with Robert Halfon, with Penny Mordaunt, that the benefits then, if you're going to look after those who need it most, must rise
Jo,
in line with inflation prices.
I used to be
I know.
DWP secretary, so all those sorts of decisions actually tend to get made in November. So it's not a decision for right now. However, this is about getting prosperity. It's about, we have 1 million vacancies at the moment. We want people to be able to take advantage of the skills. That's why we're going to continue to invest in people. And that's why we're investing in the entrepreneurs and enterprise, so we can get that private sector, particularly generation.
On the leaner state, growth, we don't know exactly how or when it is going to be generated or by how much. A leaner state implies cutting. It implies cutting to spending to departments that might include yours, for example. Is that what the government is going to do and set out in the next month or so? Cuts to departments?
Well, as you know, earlier in the year, there was a discussion potentially about how we think about the size of government, and departments have been considering that. But this is about aligning our government to make sure that we are pro-growth. So it's those elements that we will continue to work on. Jo, it's only 4 weeks ago today. We were in a cabinet meeting, our first ever cabinet meeting. Since then, a lot has happened. We've set out very clearly what we were going to do with energy costs to support both households, families with the cost of heating this winter, next winter, but also businesses are going bust. We have a plan for patients. And, of course, we will continue to do more on these elements. And as the Prime Minister said, in the next couple of months, you'll hear other people, other colleagues setting out our proposals on how we're going to try and help reduce the cost of childcare.
I'm just going to interrupt briefly to say goodbye to viewers who have been following our programme on the BBC News Channel. Thérèse Coffey, you talked about the energy intervention. There were also £45 billion of unfunded tax cuts that were announced in that mini-budget, and that had real-life consequences for people worrying about paying their mortgages. Interest rates are shooting up. We know from our colleagues at the BBC that a typical two-year fixed mortgage deal is currently 5.75%, as opposed to 2.34% in December. Do you want to apologise for that state, for that condition, for people worrying about paying their mortgage payments?
Well, the Bank of England is responsible for setting mortgage rates. The base rate is what they set, and they've been in control of that for the last 25 years. And it's important, and the Chancellor working with the Bank of England Governor to continue in making sure that we have a pro-growth
And the Bank of England
agenda.
responds to what the government is saying and doing, doesn't it?
The Bank of England does set the interest rates, and it's important that we, as we've set out, some of the things that we're doing on taxes, on things like stamp duty, helping people get on in the housing ladder, other elements that the Prime Minister had already set out about doing mortgage market reviews. You know, as I say, it's only 4 weeks ago today that we had our first cabinet meeting. So we have set out very clearly, we're taking this plan forward in terms of the growth plan.
Whatever the
and
consequences.
as you've heard, the Chancellor will be doing the medium-term plan
at the end of November. But whatever the
next month.
consequences, you do accept that the Bank of England responds to what the government does. That's why the interest rates, we've been told, are going up. Can you tell our viewers today, interest rates will go up further, won't they?
That's a decision for the Bank of England, not for me.
But they will go up further, won't they? We've heard from the Bank of England. We know those
You might want to ask the Bank of England governor, and they'll make their decision.
Right, but that is possibly what's going to happen to people, and that's as a result
But that's not
of
the decision of the
policies.
government.
But it is as a result of policies that you have outlined.
It's a decision of the Bank of England.
Let's talk about personal stuff, because you are a friend of Liz Truss, a good friend of her, and it's been a difficult week. Can you give us any insight to how she might be feeling?
I think she'll be feeling actually resolute. She's very clear. She's not a lady who flaps, anything like that. Her plan is there. She wants to get on with it. We will get on with it. And that's, you know, when we get back into Parliament next week, we've got on our very first day in the House of Commons, we'll be repealing the Health and National Insurance Levy. We are a government that's going to deliver, do what she said she's going to do, and every department is going to be a growth department, and that's what to keep focused on.
It cannot be easy. She is Prime Minister, as you say, and has only been so for a couple of weeks. She was having late-night crisis talks with Kwasi Kwarteng over what to do about that 45p tax rate policy that you and others have said have become a distraction. She must have had some pretty low moments.
I think she's just made clear decisions, quickly, dealt with stuff, moves on. You know, she's going on to Prague, to the summit with Europe. She wants to show very clearly. We've left the European Union. As a party, we delivered Brexit. But also now we're going to take advantage of that. But that doesn't mean we're not part of Europe, not of the wider family. And as she said it today in the speech, you know, it's really important that the West sticks together and takes on in effect, and takes on aspects of authoritarian regimes. And that's important that she wants to continue to make sure we have that global leadership role.
Vicky?
Do you think she's confident she can take MPs with her, though?
Yes.
How?
Because we are united around the plan for growth. We know that we need to change what has been happening in terms of trends. We know that there have been circumstances which have not been within our control. You know, the aftermath of COVID, we didn't, obviously, Putin invading Ukraine. In the past, some of the West has actually kind of almost looked the other way. And with Boris Johnson and Liz and Ben together, in the previous administration, they stood up to Putin and stood beside Ukraine. And she is continuing that. So some of these factors are not within direct control. They have economic consequences. And she is dealing with them.
All right. I know you have to go in a few minutes. I just want to show you this. We're also going to show our viewers. It's some polling done by James Johnson. It was done between the 1st and the 3rd of October. They were asked to give their view, the British public, of Liz Truss in a word. These were the 3 most common answers: useless, incompetent and untrustworthy. What do you make of the public's view of Liz Truss so far?
I think that they will see coming through on their energy bills how much it's been cut. I think they will see the support that they are getting. I think that they will see the increase in their net pay when the national insurance levy is removed. There's a number of things where we are making decisions, taking action, delivering now, and I think we will see that start to come through.
Thérèse Coffey, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do come back and grace our studios again in London sometime in the future, and we can talk about your department of
Thanks
health.
a lot. Bye-bye.
Chris, what do you make of everything that Thérèse Coffey has said about Liz Truss herself, personally, and in response to Vicky's question about whether she can take MPs with her?
Well, she's resolute. She's not patterning. I mean, she's brushing off the 45p rate. That poll there from Jail Partners, I mean, the hope is that's not going wrong. I thought she was good on the stump. She kind of reacted quite well. I think the hope is it will improve those ratings, but they're bad. I mean, he's as unpopular as Boris Johnson at his lowest ebb.
Stephen?
Well, look, I mean, she talked about every department being a growth department, but one of the other things in that speech is it sounds like every department will be a growth in spending department.
Yes.
And look, she's right to say that there are things which have been blocked in terms of planning by the devolved governments, but the biggest block in planning in England, the biggest economic unit in the union, are local councils. What is the biggest party in local government? It is the Conservatives. And I think if in this speech and if in this studio, and indeed we saw on this programme earlier this week, Chris Philp trying to block housing in his own constituency, right? If she won't, even in a speech or on this programme, stand up to her own party on it here when it's easy, this idea that they're going to get most of the big stuff in the growth agenda through the parliamentary party is obviously for the birds.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard critics last night saying she's a lame duck, and these people lining up to oppose all sorts of the supply side stuff, planning all that when it comes forward. Childcare will get cross-party approval, I'm sure, but the rest of it could be quite hard.
Yeah, I mean, that is going to be the challenge, isn't
The
it?
only thing is whether those really dire polls, which of course are really at the forefront of MPs' minds, it can go one of two ways. They can either decide we've just got to get rid of her quite quickly, or they can decide, actually, we've just got to get together here and pull together and try and get some of this stuff working. And there's no plan around that. I mean, I think it will be interesting next week when they get back to Parliament, because, you know, a lot of MPs are not here. Once they're all back in the same room, it's just very hard to predict what that atmosphere is going to be like. They don't really have a leader who's, like, agitating and organising yet. The question is, if something else were to go wrong, then what happens?
I mean, let's talk, though, about the real-life consequences for people as a result of the last few weeks, which has led, no doubt, in part, to coming up with those sorts of words. Because this is here with the party faithful, and then there are also the voters out there.
And MPs who have been speaking to constituents, they are concerned because, you know, of course there's a point. The interest rates were going up. They're already going up. They're going up in lots of other countries. The problem now is they're going up probably further than they would have done, and people might then just link that mini budget to what's happening to their mortgage repayments, for example. So it's ended up, you know, it's the Bank of England, yes, it's independent, but now there's a link between what the government did and those interest rates going up. So they will get blamed by some people.
I mean, if growth does start to appear, then will she be vindicated, Stephen? And some of these other issues that we have talked about will, to some extent, go to the background.
Yeah, look, if she can get real wage growth and real economic growth, lots of the other issues go away, not least because suddenly you don't have to worry about raising taxes. You can rely on increased revenue to fund public services. But look, the other problem here is it is not a benign global environment for growth anyway. So look, there's a real chance, and even if she can get this stuff past her party, which is unlikely, then we may not get any of that growth simply because of the global conditions.
The one thing I liked in that speech was the anti-growth coalition stuff. I think that's going to cut through to the base. I think I've had a text already from a former Labour senior strategist saying that's good framing, and they know what they're talking about. I think that is good.
Now, you think that worked, what, a bit like the coalition of chaos,
yeah,
which was what David Cameron talked about with Ed Miliband and the SNP?
Yeah, you see, as you see, there's the strikes this autumn, this winter, the winter of discontent. It does set her on the consumer side against producers, and that's where Labour are weak.
Right. I mean, it's interesting that she sets out at the beginning that I am on your side. Yeah. I understand the day-to-day problems. Part of her personal story as well. She wants to give people the freedom to make decisions with government out of the way. Will that resonate?
I mean, it might do. I think the other thing to remember here is that lots of people don't know her very well. I mean, we know her because she's been in the cabinet for
a long time.
Not particularly high profile. Even as Foreign Secretary, you know, she was obviously out of the country, not doing domestic issues. For a lot of people, she's introducing herself. And, of course, it hasn't been a great introduction this week, and that's the real problem. She's on the back foot. But I suppose her team now will be saying, right, OK, we've got a chance now to carry on, go out there, bring forward some of these things and get things done. It's the the country's been drifting along. That's her kind of mantra, isn't it? And she's going to sort it out.
Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, look, we shouldn't forget that Theresa May, who similarly we all knew in Westminster, but was not that well known by the country, had a very good start, but then when the country saw more of her in the general election, it didn't go so well. So you can see how that could turn around. And I think also, look, the thing they did very cleverly in this speech is Labour do have a vulnerability now on tax, right? And you can see that that's one of the arguments she wants to prosecute. And so that at least gives the party a sense they have, a song to sing. That I think will call some of the noises off to ease a little.
Well, you mention a song to sing. It might be a little bit crass, but Michael Pickering here from M People, the song, of course, that she walked out to. So apparently we can't stop Truss walking out to our song. Very weird. So sad it got used by this shower of a government. By the way, Truss, Labour used it with permission in the 90s. I don't want my song being a soundtrack to lies.
I don't know about use of music and copyright, but yeah, that certainly won't help. I thought the biggest cheer she got in there was when she talked about the SNP and other administrations. Have they ever seen a tax they don't like? And there's a massive cheer there. And I think
a tax rise. They don't like,
forgive me, a tax rise. I don't think that's. I think putting the party on the side of the consumer against the forces stopping growth is good and may just work, but they want to get the Truss out, get her out talking, relaxed, and none of these kind of edgy interviews, get her out more.
Well, it's interesting if you remember the election, the snap election that was called by Theresa May. It was presidential almost. It was about putting Theresa May at sort of front and centre, and it didn't work at that time. Do you think people want to see more of Liz Truss to get to know her, and they might then like her a little bit more if they know what she's about or not?
Well, that's what her team are obviously hoping. I mean, I think the other slight problem she's got is if you remember back to that leadership contest, the first rounds with MPs, only 50 MPs chose her as their first choice. So she doesn't have that overwhelming backing in the parliamentary party that Boris Johnson had. And that makes life incredibly difficult. And yeah, as I say, they haven't decided what they're going to do about it. And there are still a lot of senior figures saying, for goodness sake, we've just got to give it a chance. We can't be getting rid of another leader.
And in the end, it will come down to the economy, won't it? Stupid. Faisal Islam here, the BBC's economics editor, has just tweeted, I talked about two-year fixed-rate mortgages. Well, they've just topped 6%. Typical two-year fixed-rate mortgage has topped 6% for the first time in 14 years. I do remember when they were 5%. I'm so old. Now 6.07% according to Money Facts. That's a big problem.
That is eye-watering. That is money. That is a big hit for a lot of people trying to remortgage next year. And the debt is so high as well. It's going to be a real problem here. And the problem that this is now, to a degree, on the government. People will be blaming Truss and Kwarteng's policy of this, even though it might not be entirely fair. There's global forces at play. They'll be blamed.
Now, I mean, that is the difficulty, isn't it? Even though Thérèse Coffey did a valiant job there trying to say that these are global issues, the Bank of England is independent and makes those decisions to put up interest rates. But figures like that will hit home, to coin a phrase.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that there are difficult things coming, and it's not just interest rates. It's the energy bills, and of course they have managed to cap them to a certain extent, but they're still going up. People are going to start to feel a lot poorer, and that is very difficult when you're in government. You will inevitably be blamed, and you've been in power for 12 years.
Except a lot of money is coming back to people, isn't it, Stephen Bush? Whether it is on the sort of cap on energy prices. Yes, they're still high. There are rebates coming back to people. Those tax cuts will start to feed in. And yet they're not getting credit for it, are they?
Well, part of the problem is, one, it's only a cap on unit costs, so people, as you say, will have higher... But also, the average person is not actually a net winner of this budget, right? Because if you're renting and your landlord's mortgage goes up, your rent's going to go up. If your mortgage goes up, your mortgage is going up. Yet even people right at the upper end of the income distribution are on, they're getting a nominal tax cut. But, I was speaking to one of our readers and they were saying, well, yeah, this is great. This means when I refinance, the government's tax cut is worth a month of the increased payments on the mortgage. And that's sort of the problem. The political economy here is not that good.
Yeah, well, it does put it into perspective. Is Liz Truss going to last until 2024, which is the possible date of the next election?
We'll know more next week. I mean, the talk last night was of appointing a new replacement. I think the country, not even the party, can take it.
I mean, yes, the idea of another contest, maybe not, but then that does involve them having to coalesce around one person. And let's face it, the whole problem with the party, the parliamentary party, is the different factions, those rivalries that have, carried on over the last few years. That might be the one thing that keeps her in place, is that they can't agree on somebody else.
Don't replace leaders between elections. it's kind of anti-democratic.
Well, there is a mandate issue, I think, isn't there? There's a mandate issue because, you know, the manifesto that Boris Johnson went on, that's gone.
All right, that's all we have time for today on the day of Liz Truss's speech. Thank you to all of my guests here in Birmingham. It's goodbye from us. Elizabeth Glinker will be with you tomorrow for more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and BBC iPlayer.